Welcome to the Level Up Lab, a show where we discuss fitness, nutrition, and all things wellness. We want to demystify what it takes to be healthy and strong while having fun along the way. Sometimes we'll chat, sometimes we'll have guest experts, and sometimes we will go through rigorous clinical trials that either support or refute generally accepted practices in fitness and nutrition. Tyler and Dan are the founders and owners of Level Up Fitness in Boca Raton, the premier strength training gym in South Florida. We are fierce advocates that building and maintaining lean muscle mass is the key to a long and healthy life. For anyone who wants to be strong, fit, and healthy well into old age, listen to Tyler and Dan lay out the path in a fun and entertaining way. We hope you share and enjoy. Welcome back to the show.
All right. Hey, Tyler.
And welcome back to those of you guys who tuned into episode 1. This is now episode 2 of the Level Up Lab.
Yeah.
I'm Tyler and
I'm Dan, and we made it to episode 2.
We did. We actually are getting a second recording in, which is great on us with our schedules. So that's awesome. And this is something, if you didn't tune into episode 1, we're going to be doing this hopefully once a month. And this is more so for our members, but of course geared to anybody who is interested in general fitness, general strength training in particular, because that's what we mostly specialize in, and learning how to become stronger and healthier people.
Yeah. And that's literally our mission. And then to take some of the science behind this, and not every episode will be about this, but this one will be about the science of strength training. What does data actually say? And before we get into that, we should probably caveat and say, we are not scientists, we are not MDs, we're not deep in the science of this. But what we are is, one, you are an experienced trainer who knows a lot about this. I'm a baby trainer who just getting started in this, but I love to do research too. And so we've gone through a lot of data together and tried to unpack it. We also listen to a lot of smart people. So, not all of this is going to be maybe perfect, but our expectation is to try to make this accessible, interesting, and very understandable, right?
Correct. And that is the goal of this podcast, is to kind of be the tip of the spear, if you will, of like trying to find the information that's out there, because there's so much data and information, and trying to pull it all together and say, hey, here's what's the most current that's out there. Here's what like the research says, the studies say, and also goes along with what we're seeing at our own facility, where we kind of get a large scale, almost like a sample size of getting to see our own practices at work and seeing how our members are getting the benefits from that. And especially what we've done so far, it's been pretty cool. One thing I want to point out is, Dan, you're actually, baby trainer. You're very certified. You know what you're doing. But one thing you are is you're a consumer of fitness. You've been taking group workouts and different classes and different styles of workouts for a very long time. And I think you have a better sense more than anybody of what works out there, what you've seen benefit from, depending on the type of modality that the class or the workout is.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've learned is that a lot of things work, right? So moving your body works, right? Lifting heavy things works. Mm-hmm. They're all important, right? And everybody is different in what they enjoy, and not just the physical benefits they get, but the mental benefits they get from exercise. But the data is really interesting, and there hasn't been a tremendous amount of information on the science of strength training until more recently, and now there's a lot of it, and it's really interesting. And I thought it might be interesting for us to start out with a comparison of the health benefit or detriment of a couple of things, and then we can walk through a couple of studies. There's a number of studies about smoking and about the health detriments of smoking. And there's been in the US and the UK studies that show if you smoke, you are at risk for all-cause mortality, meaning death for any reason, by over 250% higher than people who don't smoke. Wow. Tremendous, right? But not a surprise. We know this, right? And said another way, if you stop smoking, your risk of dying from any cause, all-cause mortality, can go down by something like 50 to 90%. It's a tremendous benefit to stop smoking. These shouldn't be surprising to anybody. There's been tons of data on smoking. Did you know that strength training is actually quite similar to that?
It doesn't surprise me, especially when you look at something like a net negative, like smoking or alcohol, unfortunately, as much as we may enjoy it. But there's a net negative things. Then to the flip side, there's very net positive things.
Yeah. So there is a study that was in the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's actually not a new study. It's about 20 years old. But in that study, they compared muscle strength, and they separated, it was a huge number of participants in this study, and they separated them into quintiles, top 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%. And what they found was that the weakest people in the bottom 20% of muscle strength were at 250% higher risk of all-cause mortality than the highest, same as smoking. And said another way, if you were in the highest quintile, meaning the strongest quintile, you had a 62% reduction in your risk of death from all causes. So the benefits of strength training are about the same as smoking cessation in longevity. And I think that's just absolutely fascinating that it lines up that way.
And looking at the bigger number, that was at 310% net difference between, like, if you are doing the negative activity as opposed to doing like the positive thing that's gonna benefit you. Like, it's really helping you out that much more.
Yeah. Now, so then we're going to get through a few of these kind of studies, because I think it's really important to talk about them, because they come from different angles sometimes and different measurements and different study design. But what is interesting is the science of strength training is, in my view, and like you said, I've been an exercise consumer for a long time, even more positive than I would have thought. The benefits of muscle mass and muscle strength. Now, there are also benefits, tremendous benefits, by the way, cardiovascular activity. Maybe we'll touch on some of those, or maybe we'll get to them at another time, because there's so much we want to get through today. But the point is, there is actual data and science now behind muscle mass and muscle strength being hugely positive to longevity, and not just longevity, but what some people are calling now health span, which is, you know, how healthy you are for the life, not how long you live, but how healthy you are in those last 20 years of life.
I like that so much better too, because you hear, oh, your lifespan increases by 10 to 15 years. Well, is that life I'm going to be able to like live, you know, joyfully and, you know, move well? And, you know, for many people, it's not. It's just, hey, we're extending how many years you're still kicking it on this planet. Yep. So, you know, be able to look at like, hey, you're going to get an additional, you know, 10 plus years of enjoyable life, of enjoyable health span left, I think is really, really big. Yeah, I'm excited because, this is really our first episode. We get to get real tactical on like the studies. And quick side note, we will, everything we reference or anything even that we don't reference that we have in our notes, we will make available through like in the description and in sources, so that way you guys can look up and read these things for yourselves as well.
Right.
So going back to longevity, I think that's like kind of the biggest benefit overall that doesn't really get talked about when regards to resistance training. Obviously, we hear the benefits of all the I would say vain things, like, you know, your muscle belly size, the amount, you know, your posture, your presence in a sense. But, you know, looking at how long you're able to you know, extend your life in enjoyable years is so like not talked about enough.
I agree. And you know, that term longevity has already gotten kind of overused. I think a lot of us are using it. It's become a very, you know, in the moment type thing. But when I hear longevity, what I hear or what I think about more is how you feel through the latter stages of your life. Really is like, what are you able to do? Do you feel good? Are you in pain or not? Are you able to lift your grandchildren or not? Are you able to walk, you know, miles and miles and miles if you're going on a trip or not? You know, these are the things that longevity means to me. I think a lot of people think of it as like, how long are you going to live? I think that's less important than the quality of those years, right?
Exactly. So,
but now talk about the biological age, right? Because you have an interesting study on that.
That was the thing, is that, and so we're going to be referencing studies. We're also pulling studies from to like they're more recent, something that like, okay, like there's a lot out there. Is this current? Is this up to date? Went through a bunch, and we found one that came out only about a year or two ago. It was the finding you're looking at your telomere length, and basically your overall biological age, which is telomeres are essentially the, and again, we're not scientists, but they're the DNA end caps of your chromosomes that basically preserve your cells in a sense. Right. And over time, that your telomere length will dwindle. They get smaller as you age. Now, what they found is that they looked at over almost 4,800 people, and they found that strength training only 90 minutes a week actually preserved your telomere length by about 15 to 20%. So it's pretty significant. And it's that again, is one of those things that you don't think about and that you're not going to see or really ever feel. But that's a massive benefit overall. And it's only 90 minutes a week. That's not 90 minutes a day.
So does that mean, let's put it to plain English, right? So does telomere length mean the health of your cells, the health of your muscles? The longer the telomere length, the healthier they are, or the more, and they degrade over time? Like, we know that we lose muscle mass over time. We know that our cells, have less mitochondrial function over time. So is telomere length kind of part of that?
Yeah, it's almost like a sanding block that over time is going to wear away.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what, it's going to wear away, and there's not much you can do to really build it back. But you can preserve it. You can make it stronger, so that way, as you kind of grind away at whatever you're grinding at, that's going to continue to preserve and not wear down as fast.
And so if you see, I'm assuming longer telomere length means younger biological age.
Yes.
Yeah. So
exactly. And there's people trying to, hack that, and they're like, oh, they have like products and things that, I mean, you hear it's all, kind of hacky. They haven't really found something that can actually improve your telomere length yet. But again, this strength training and resistance training as a whole, and just in general, only if 20 minutes a day for a couple days a week, 30 minutes a few days a week is very massively beneficial to preserving that and preserving that your overall lifespan.
I think it's fascinating because we know a lot of the studies that we're going to reference, a lot of the benefit from resistance training happens when you go from doing none to some. You get like a tremendous benefit if you're in that bottom quartile or quintile and you go to the next quartile or quintile. That's where you see giant improvement, and then you have much more incremental improvement from there, which is kind of expected, right? Your muscles adapt, and eventually you have to do more and more and more. And the benefit accrues, but the benefit accrues a lot slower, right? It's a lot harder to squeeze the analogy I always heard is that last little bit of toothpaste from the tube. It's a lot harder to get.
It's the timeline of a lifter. You start off with your beginner gains. You start off with once you first start lifting, you see a lot of benefit. All of a sudden, you're moving way better, obviously, because you were kind of netting zero from before, and now all of a sudden you're doing these things. You're creating these neural pathways in your brain, and by doing them every day or every other day, you're only going to get better at them. The muscle comes on quickly, and then as you get better, that your body will adapt, like it always adapts to things. So you have to then increase the stimulus, whether it's increase the amount of weight, increase your range of motion, increase. There's several ways you can increase your reps, increase your sets, the frequency, the volume. There's 100 different ways you can progressively overload to get better, but you have to do those things. And again, starting from zero to all of a sudden moving and squatting and pressing, that is it. That's why it's almost like just throwing the gear shift to first gear and it's revving it up really quickly. You know?
Yeah, and by the way, we should take a second here to, as we go through these studies, we've already looked to make sure that these studies at least have, randomized control trials, or if they're not randomized control trials, that they're well controlled. Not all studies can you say are definitively XYZ. Now you can directionally say they're telling you something, and I think that's what we try to do. Is we try to find the most reference studies, the ones that have the best design to them. We're not going to go in and caveat and tell you all of the things that could be confounding, but just for everyone who's listening, one of the things that you should also understand about resistance training is that it's hard to isolate oftentimes just the training impact, because we have other things in our lives that are hard to control, like nutrition. Like, you can try to control for nutrition, but you often, can't, because nutrition is such a big part of our lives and so heterogeneous. But what you'll find from all of these things is that resistance training is unequivocally good. We know this. And it tends to be that the people who do lift and do have strong resistance training programs also do other healthy things, right? And those end up amplifying some of these benefits over time, right?
Yeah, and especially from experience after teaching so many classes and seeing people going from, again, the net zero to all of a sudden now working out 3-4 days a week. Now all of a sudden they're eating better. They're exhausted by the end of the day because they're working out, and they're probably getting up early. So all of a sudden now they're going to bed earlier. Their sleep is improving. Yeah. It's one of those circumstantially. You start to do more healthy habits, and you start to see even more net benefit on top of the thing that you're doing that's causing you net benefit from the to begin with.
Yeah.
So
let's go through a couple of studies, and we don't have to spend a huge amount of time on each one, but we've already talked about resistance training is as good as smoking cessation, and we've already talked about telomere length and biological age, but we didn't really get into so much the whys. Like, why do we think strength training, muscle strength, muscle mass actually seems to have these benefits. So each one of these studies gets a little bit into that. So maybe I'll tee them off, and then you give your interpretation of them. So one of the ones that we looked at is a relatively recent meta-analysis. Meta-analysis means it's an analysis of a bunch of other studies. In this case, 16 other studies with 81,000 participants. So this is very, very large meta-analysis. And what they found was having a low skeletal muscle mass index was associated with a 57% increase of all-cause mortality. And it was most pronounced in people that were also overweight. So if you were overweight and low muscle, all right, so that's the combination, suggesting that sarcopenic obesity was a real risk factor. Sarcopenia is when you lose muscle mass, right? So, losing muscle mass and being obese was really, really bad. And so that contributes to frailty, chronic disease vulnerability, and premature mortality. Does that surprise you at all?
No, I mean, it's obvious. It's one of those things. Even in my first keynote here is like, the more you do something, the better you'll become at it and the stronger you'll become at it. And that just goes to show people who exercise regularly, they're naturally stronger people because they have to be. The things that they're doing, they're forcing their body to do very uncomfortable things. Somebody that has, to your point, low muscle mass, high body fat, they probably have a lot of other comorbidities as well. Morbidities, I can't talk. And things, they probably are they're probably diabetic. They probably have, they're probably hypertensive. They probably have high blood pressure. There's a lot of things that will also detriment your health, and again, lower your lifespan, lower your overall health span. So, and the people who are lifting weights and exercising and running and stressing their heart rate, their body has to put on muscle, and muscle, again, as we will go through in future episodes, is only beneficial to you for your health span.
Right. So I thought that was interesting, and it gets into the when we get older, we are naturally prone to sarcopenia. Losing muscle mass, right? To the point of, sometimes 1% every year or two, right? It becomes a big thing if you don't do anything to offset it, like resistance training. And most of the population is obese already. So, right. So that's already putting you on a slippery slope. Now, here is another one. This one was a global analysis of 3 million people, and they used grip strength as the kind of predictor, of muscle mass. So we've seen people use leg extension strength. We've seen grip strength. A lot of these are just a marker for strength, muscle mass, right? And what they found was the strongest third of people with grip strength had roughly 60% lower all-cause mortality than those in the weakest third. And like we were saying before, the benefit really accrued from the 0 to the next one. They call it a J-shaped curve, where you get this massive improvement, and then it kind of starts to level off. And they said grip strength correlates with overall muscle function, and it's a convenient marker for frailty versus vitality. So it gets into frail, fall risk, all of these things that could lead to other serious things, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, think about what you're doing when you're training your grip. If you have a strong grip, you're probably doing lots of other very robust actions to work on that grip. You're lifting heavy things. You're carrying things great distances. So other muscles are obviously working. Wrist strength correlates very similar to foot strength. If you have strong feet, it means you're probably going to have a strong base. And that's a whole another topic for another discussion is, if the strength of your feet when you're lifting and making sure you got proper footwear. But that doesn't surprise me one bit. I think the thing that surprises me is how high the number is. What was you say, 60%? 60%, like that.
Yeah, lower all-cause mortality.
That is very telling that, hey, like, you have to do things that are that are stressing those joints and ligaments all throughout the body. And again, grip strength, it's working more than just that. It's you've got your shoulders involved. You got your core having to hold whatever you're holding. That makes a ton of sense.
And this study didn't get into this too, but we also know when you stress your muscles, which is required to build strong muscles, right? Like I think it may be a little bit counterintuitive if you don't strength train, that actually tearing muscle fibers to rebuild muscle fibers is how muscles get stronger. That's a simplified version. I know it's a simplified version of it, but it's a simplified version. Yeah, we could go deeper into that, but I'm going to give you the quick layman's version. But it also is, as we get older, you lose bone density too. And the only way to actually increase bone density, besides calcium and normal good nutrition, is by actually stressing the bones too, right? Which is, again, resistance training. And there's great data. We're probably not going to talk about it today. There's great data on even osteoarthritic older women lifting weights and getting benefits to bone density and muscle mass, so that if they fall, hopefully they don't fall because they have better balance now. But if they do fall, they don't necessarily break anything either.
And that's been a point made, I think, by a lot of people online, is that, hey, if you could just prevent yourself from falling altogether, you're going to obviously extend the amount of years that you live. And that was a study another very recent one that came out only a few weeks ago, looking at participants, and they were just looking at the fact that, hey, if you've got stable shoulders and hips, and if you can reduce the amount of times you fall, it's like you're improving your life by like 4 years. Like your risk of all-cause mortality decreases by 4 years.
And there's some really terrifying data, and I'm going to butcher the number, so don't quote it. But there was something like, if you are over age 60 and fracture a hip, roughly like 20% of patients who fracture a hip and go to the hospital at that age are dead within a year. It's a giant number. And it's not just always due to the fracture itself. It's due to the deleterious effects after that, or a hospital-acquired infection, or something afterwards. Like, that is severe risk of something else happening.
It's the things that they don't tell you that can happen from the result of having a broken hip. It's having to go to the hospital, having to risk yourself being susceptible to whatever else is in that hospital that you can catch, whatever other side effects of maybe the medications you have to be on. There's so many things that it's like, hey, I fell and I hurt my hip, it'll get better. It's like, well, you got to really watch everything else, especially as you get older. And that's another big benefit of strength training at starting at any age, is that people think if you haven't started early on, you can't get any benefit. It's like an on switch for anybody. It can start at any time. You'll get those beginner gains we talked about in the beginning, and the benefits come very, very quickly. So if you're very weak and frail, by introducing strength training, you can become a robust, strong individual in a very short amount of time. The body has to adapt very quickly, no matter what the age.
Yeah, maybe we'll link somehow. There's this great video you and I were talking about this morning of these women in Australia that were, either had osteoarthritis or at high risk of osteoarthritis, and they were under a clinical trial to see if strength training, resistance training would benefit them, and they were deadlifting. Yeah. These much older women with real, bone density issues, deadlifting their body weight and putting on muscle and strengthening their bones. It was a fascinating thing. So if anybody wants to go deep into a YouTube rabbit hole.
And I love that because, and I saw that, and the best part of the researcher was saying that, hey, we weren't sure if some of these older women would want to start doing the resistance training. We tell them it's fitness, and they're thinking water aerobics or jazzercise, and then we got them in there doing Olympic lifting and doing deadlifts and squats, but they're all super into it. And that's, I think, the cool part, is that I think if it's taught in a way, if it's presented in a way that's accessible and that's fun, more people would do it. I think more people would not be as afraid of barbells and kettlebells, and they would do more of it. And we'd have a stronger, robuster society, and we would get that obesity number down that we talked in the last episode from 60% as a nation down lower. I think that's kind of the goal as the fitness industry is trying to get that, those numbers down.
Agreed. And maybe before we move on to the next one, and I think we should have an entire episode on progressive overload, because I think it's one of the most important things in resistance training, but I think it is sometimes not fully understood. People think of it as just lifting heavy and lifting heavier and lifting heavier. That's one way to do it, but that's not necessarily always the right way to do it.
That's a very direct way of going about it. Yeah.
But we'll talk more about that. But I think the other thing I want to talk about with resistance training too is how important form is to this, because resistance training obviously has all these benefits. We know all these benefits, but one of the ways you get all these benefits is by being able to constantly do it. I mean, to not get off your game, and the getting off your game happens often. Life gets in the way, but certainly injury can be too. So it's so important to make sure your form is so locked in when you're doing deadlifts, let's say, or back squats or whatever, so that you're not going to put yourself at risk, and you're going to get all of these benefits.
Yeah, I mean, living to fight another day, in a sense. You want to make sure that you're doing enough volume that you're stressing your body for benefit, but not so much to where you you get to the point where you feel debilitated every single day. I get it. There's workouts where you're sore for 2 or 3 days.
Sore is different.
Sore is different. Even little aches and pains can be common. But if it's like every day, the workout you're doing is just kicking your ass, and you just can't. You have your heart rate's up when you wake up in the morning. You struggle to get through normal everyday activities. Then that would be the case where you're overtraining.
Right.
In some degree. So resistance training, that can happen pretty easily because a lot of the movements they're heavily loaded, they're very compound, they're very dynamic. There's a lot happening, and somebody that's brand new to it, trying to do it every day can be a lot, especially if you have somebody pushing you through those big compound lifts.
Yeah.
So taking it, that's why, especially at Level Up, we stress so much, like if you're new to strength training, you have to go slow. You have to start at level 1. Feel it out. Test your range of motion. We call it testing your range of motion rather than see how stiff you are.
Right, exactly. And I think it's so important because so much of the benefit comes from just the discipline of doing it regularly, as opposed to, progressive overload. Yes, but progressive overload with good form. And like you said, that takes many different, modalities that we can do. Here's a study. Again, it was a hand grip strength study where they found that. But they were different outcomes. So they were looking at the reduction in cause-specific mortality. So not all-cause mortality, specific cause mortality, dying from specific things like cardiovascular disease. Mm-hmm. And what they found was muscular fitness helps buffer against fatal chronic illnesses like cardiovascular disease, like a very significant reduction. And there was another one here where they found a meta-analysis in 2022, 10 to 17% lower risk of developing heart disease, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. That's kind of interesting, right? Because, it's one thing if you say, well, you're preventing hip fractures because, you have strong bones and strong muscles. But then you're getting into, heart disease, cancer, metabolic diseases like diabetes. That's less intuitive understanding why, that might be like. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the body is a very, very complicated unit. There's a lot of different systems that are working all at the same time. So to see the different reductions in cause mortality, like the different, whether it's cancer, whether it's, diabetes, whatever the cause may be, for example, like if you're trying to reduce your risk of cardiovascular health, you're trying to train your heart rate. If you do more cardio-based workouts, you will have a stronger heart. All-cause mortality will go down significantly more the harder you train that. Right. So, typically if you're working out in a weight room, it makes sense. You're doing lifts, your heart rate's going up a little bit, so there's some slight benefit there. So that's what's cool about strength training is that you kind of get all these small little benefits packed into one, where as opposed to cardiovascular training, there's some there's some there obviously because the motion you're using, but it's primarily a cardio workout, so you're stressing the heart. So it makes sense where you have these different smaller benefits based on one general thing that you're doing. I don't know if that makes sense.
You're basically saying that there's peripheral knock-on benefits of resistance training, which definitely there is, and actually you just teed it up perfectly because they go further on to say that combining strength training with aerobic exercise actually is even more beneficial. And what they said from a metabolic perspective, more muscle tissue improves insulin sensitivity. So here you go. This is the diabetes relationship. If you have more muscle, reduces insulin sensitivity, better glucose regulation, and then a huge drop in diabetes risk up to 60% with only 1 hour a week of strength training. Now, you and I were going back and forth on this during the week because this was a less intuitive thing for me. I didn't really understand why your risk of diabetes would go down from lifting. I just couldn't comprehend it until we started to get into the physiology of it. And what we talked about was that your muscles are, what was the term we used? A glycogen sink.
A glycogen sink.
A glycogen sink, right? You have glycogen is basically sugar that fuels your body, right? It's the accessible fuel for movement, exercise, running your body, essentially. And I'm going to get the order of magnitude off, but your liver can hold something like 100 grams of glycogen, but your muscles like 500 to 600 grams of glycogen. And so the more muscle you have, the more glycogen reserve, and then the more resistance training you do, the more you use that glycogen reserve. And so you have less of that floating around your bloodstream, less taxing on the body from a metabolic sense. So now I finally get it, right? So your muscles are where your glycogen reserves are, you know, and the more you use them, the more you can eliminate or use productively those glycogen reserves, as opposed to it being floating around your blood. And then, you know, you can't hold glycogen forever. If you're not using it, it ends up being stored as fat, right? So it finally kind of all came around to me, but it took me a while to finally understand that.
I love that analogy of a glycogen sink, because it makes sense. Like, you filled the sink up, you want to, you know, use what's in the sink, and if you don't use it after a while, the water becomes still. It probably becomes bacteria infected and everything. Right. If you're filling it up every time, it's going to spill over. Right. It relates to the muscle glycogen storage. Hey, if you're not going to use that glycogen, it's going to get then stored as fat. Right. Your sink's going to overflow. Whereas if you're emptying out that sink every day, you can maintain that sink, you can clean it a little bit, you know, and make it. It is a good analogy. Another one I actually thought of was a car, and it's funny. I feel like a car is a perfect analogy for the body in many ways, but this engine specifically, you always want to, you know, with the car engine, you want to open it up every now and again. You actually want to rev it up to, you know, 70,000 RPMs. It gets, you know,
sometimes you get a ticket like I do.
Yeah, well, I had a mechanic tell me this. I actually don't know these things, but he was like, yeah, it prevents carbon buildup. It gets moisture out of the engine. I'm like, oh, you're so smart. But it's kind of similar to the body and glycogen storage. You have to deplete those muscles in order to get some of these benefits that we were talking about earlier, because that's just how it works. It's just how the body, that's just how it is.
Yeah, I like that. I love, we obviously know that glucose and glycogen is the stored form of glucose. That's what's used to power your body to function every day, right? We need, you know, so people who say like, I don't eat carbs. Yes, you do. And you have to eat carbs, because carbs have glucose that fuel your body with glycogen, but it's having the good carbs, right, and good fats that will do that. And then if you resistance train and cardio train, but especially resistance train for the storage capacity of that glycogen, you end up not having it float around and develop into adipose tissue, fat tissue, right? That's where all of a sudden things get bad, right? Because you're storing excess fat. That fat gets oxidized and then ends up floating around and creating plaques in your arteries that end up being, potential risk for cardiovascular disease or even oncological diseases down the road. So, you know, it all finally crystallized for me. I was having a hard time understanding why muscle reduces your chance of diabetes, but that makes so much more sense.
Well, I was about to pull it all back together, and that's why diabetes goes down, or the risk of diabetes goes down, is because of that self-regulating system that you're doing when you are strength training regularly and depleting those glycogen storages. So that's it exactly, man. I mean,
and if you pull it back to that other study, which is that people have sarcopenia and obesity, right? So if your muscle mass is going down, your body fat is going up, then you're really raising the chances of all of these diseases by a factor of who knows what, right? Like so much higher. And
yeah, the factor kind of differentiates depending on other lifestyle factors, depending on if you're smoking, if you're very sedentary, if you're in a very polluted environment. So, but yeah, I mean, in the end, you're better off doing something better than nothing. You really are, even if it's only 1 or 2 days a week. Again, 90 minutes a week, you could start seeing just some of these crazy benefits.
Yeah, and it really is. If you think about things that we can do for our bodies or medicines we can take, right? There are medicines that cure things. There are medicines that help prevent things. There are medicines that maybe have dubious, usage. But if you think of resistance training as like medicine for your body, certainly natural medicine for your body, there is almost nothing that reduces your risk of death more than lifting weights, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. Like you said, I've been a consumer of physical fitness and gyms and whatever for a long time. This still blows me away that you can see such a tremendous benefit to your longevity and your health from lifting heavy circles.
Yeah, in a sense. And I want to make it clear that it's not just like lifting weights, lifting barbells and free weights that will get there. I know plenty of people that are doing reformer Pilates that they're getting all those benefits because, again, it's something outside of what you're used to doing in your everyday. That's an outside stimulus that's going to promote growth for the rest of your body. So if you're not used to doing, again, taking Pilates as an example, and now all of a sudden you're doing it 3-4 days a week, you are going to also see beginner gains in whatever you are focusing on. And, I've only taken one Pilates class, but it's a lot of, glutes and hammies and a lot of very other painful muscles.
Those are
I don't work very often.
Muscles too, though.
Yeah, but again, those are all muscles too, and they are all going to respond the same way. The thing with barbells and free weights is that it's measurable because there's numbers attached to them, physical, actual numbers, and it's a very easy way to quickly approach progressive overload, because if you're lifting the weight, I can do it. I throw more on, all of a sudden I can't do it. Well, now I have to work at that weight that I can't do so I can become stronger at it, and my body will respond accordingly by putting on lean mass.
Yeah, and then you get like these other benefits of better balance, right? You get, better ability to walk when you're 80, 90 years old, coordination, right? If hopefully you won't fall now because you have all of these better benefits. But if you do fall, you're less likely to fracture something because you have strong muscle and bone.
And side note on that, a lot of people and trainers will focus a lot on like balance training and things like that in their strength training workouts. And there is a time and place for that. But if you're training in the gym for strength, to work on strength, you need to just focus on that. Yeah. If you're going to train for balance, then really make it a hard balance workout. Don't try to be doing like a row while standing on an upside down Bosu ball. Like that's it. I get what you're trying to do there, but it doesn't translate the way you think it does.
No, but even if you don't do balance exercises, by doing normal strength training exercise, you will have better balance.
That's my point.
Right?
That's my point, is that just by doing the normal everyday exercises with balance will actually improve your overall disbalance, practices and overall balance.
All right. Now, those are kind of the trials I wanted to go through, but I wanted to see if maybe in the time we have left, we could talk a little bit about what you should be feeling like when you're doing these strength training exercises. Once you've gotten, warmed up, right? And maybe done a couple of warm up sets at very, very lightweight, or like we do at very low levels to kind of get your muscles primed and ready for the workout. There's this concept of failure that I think we can have a whole other episode about, but I want to kind of tease it a little bit now. Like when you're in a level up class, let's put it in our world for a second. How far should I go on, every set that I do? Should I be going right to failure on everything, and maybe explain what failure actually is, and then how far do you think you should go on your sets?
Yeah, well, first off, on a set of 15, by rep 3, you should be questioning your life's decisions. Okay, I'm joking. No, that's how I work out. No, so the idea of failure is like how it sounds. You're taking a body part or a muscle through a range of motion enough times where it can physically no longer perform that motion at that given range of motion. And breakdown and failure a lot of the time looks like form breakdown, obviously, because once you, doing a bicep curl, for example, as the biceps start to fatigue, you start to probably you throw your shoulders into it, throw your hips into it, because you're trying to get momentum to help the biceps out, because they can no longer perform that motion that you're trying to do. So when you are training and you're lifting during a set, let's take a set of 10 reps, and you're trying to train close to failure, by about rep 6 or 7, it should be getting pretty tough. And there's a point where you almost want to have a little mental battle where you're like, I could put it down, but I think I can get 2 or 3 more
at good form.
At good form, or before your form starts, you're like, okay, I think I can hold my form. Like a dumbbell row is a perfect example, because that has one of the biggest form breakdowns ever, because as soon as you get tired, you start throwing your hips and shoulders into it. So if you can keep the good straight back, big stretch at the bottom, pull it up, control it back down, and if after a while you're like, okay, I'm at rep 5, and all of a sudden I'm really feeling it, but I think I can do maybe 2 more with really good form before I have to start to hitch it. Get those 2 reps, and that is about as close to a failure set as you can be without breaking down form.
Right. So to get these benefits that we've been talking about, is that what the mindset should be? Like pretty much every set, I want to get as close to failure without compromising my form as possible? Or do you think you can get 90% of the benefit another way?
It's the latter more than anything. I mean, failure, it has its time and place, but to get some of the benefits we're talking about, to get the reduction in all-cause mortality and to get the reduction in diabetes and cancer, it's really just active, moderate movements. They say moderate exercise, not even necessarily intense, for 90 minutes a week, and that's strength training specifically. And then cardio is moderate to intense, 20 minutes a day for 3 days a week.
Okay.
So it's even less than that.
So you can get almost all of these benefits without training to failure. The training to failure is when you're really trying to gain muscle.
When you're really you're trying to maximize your strength and muscle gains, Yes,
to get to like that tippy top of that cohort.
Yeah, or to whatever goal if you're really trying to put on muscle, then you want to try to get as close to failure as you can. You want to try to create as much mechanical tension as you possibly can, as much muscle breakdown, but you as you possibly can to stimulate growth.
Right.
You can still, the point of this whole podcast is you're still getting the benefits and the growth stimulation with just moderate strength training, by just doing the movements of squatting, hinging, pressing. You're getting all of that, even though you're not going crazy like you would see in a lot of workouts. So that's kind of the big point overall.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great to differentiate those things because, maybe it's because of the things that I follow, but a lot of the things I follow are like, you got to go to failure, very close to failure. And I think, for me, who's actually trying to put on significant muscle, like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes some sense, at least building up to that over time, but not everybody needs to do that, right? If you're doing the discipline of showing up, multiple times a week, doing the workouts that you've programmed that are already very well thought out, to put you in a good muscle maintenance or plus strength, you don't necessarily need to be going to failure.
Nope. And especially if you're doing it multiple times a week, multiple weeks of the year, then you're on the path. And that's my point when people start at Level Up is, hey, just get in here and just start doing the classes. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter really what maybe the movements are of that day. It will after a while. Like, we want to make sure you're balanced, but just start getting into the practice of axial loading your body, getting some stress under your ligaments and put a bar on your back or on your shoulders. That is only going to benefit you over time. And then once we get them going and they start seeing some benefits, okay, now we can you want to focus on your legs more, go more on the lower body days. You want your shoulders to strength to increase. We can start to get more specific from there.
That's great. That's really, really helpful. I think a lot of people will certainly resonate with that.
Yeah, don't overcomplicate it. Just get started, get moving, and I'm safe to say we're obviously not the only strength training gym, out there. If you're not in South Florida, there's plenty of other options, plenty of other places popping up, I think, all over America. Hopefully Level Ups will be all over the place, but it's definitely a movement. I think that's happening. I think the industry's starting to go there. I know we discussed that in the last episode, and I'm excited because it's only going to make people actually stronger. I think we're finally getting away from all the HIIT and cardio workouts, and we're starting to focus now more on the strength.
Yeah, I think a well-balanced, right? You got to move your body, right? You need cardiovascular activity to keep a healthy heart, and then you need to be strong. And we've just shown a lot of data that shows the stronger you are, the better. Reduces the prevalence of disease, of all-cause mortality. That's a pretty big deal. Like death from any reason.
I know.
That's a pretty big thing. So, and these are now well-controlled, trials with tens of thousands of participants. These are not by chance. These are replicable studies that keep showing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, guys, I hope that this was helpful. I think it's a good place to kind of put an end to it. We will be posting all of the references on all the pages that we have access to. You guys will be able to reference this episode. This episode, again, is free. Now, just so you guys know that in future episodes, we're going to make this part of a paid membership. But for the time being, we're just getting the word out there. Make sure you guys share this with your friends and family. Tell them that, we're got a podcast going to hopefully educate the masses on really what's out there in the research and in the industry.
Yeah, and if there's something you want to hear us talk about or questions that you have, let you know where to find us. Send them our way.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, bud.